Welcome to Conversations About Construction. I'm Dave Trafford. This podcast is produced and presented by the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario. Members of the Alliance build your homes. They build your transportation networks and the systems that deliver safe, clean drinking water to your kitchen sink. This series will focus on industry innovations and solutions that support sustainable economic development and Ontario's world-class standard of living. In this episode, the history of Toronto's public transit. Our guests are Senior Transportation Planner David Crowley, and Ed Levy is the author of Rapid Transit in Toronto, A Century of Plans, Projects, Politics, and Paralysis. The COVID-19 pandemic has pushed us to extraordinary limits on all kinds of things that we never would have thought of. The whole question around how we work, how we move this city has shone a light on transportation services, certainly not just in Toronto, but I think right across the province. But certainly in Toronto, only because we look at the number of bodies that get moved on the TTC annually. It's more than 1 billion rides a year. And we lose sight of that in a hurry, particularly in the Greater Toronto area. Now, we're talking about TTC losing $22 million a month because of the changes in ridership. So we're having to rethink the planning around transit, the necessity of transit, the actual balance in transit, whether that becomes your bike, your car, your bus, your subway. So we are happy to have David Crowley here with us and Ed Levy, and we're going to kind of dig in on some of the history, some of the things we got right, and some of the things where we just keep putting a rake out in front of us and stepping on it, because this is going to be a big question as we move forward in terms of how we invest in infrastructure is one thing, but how do we plan for transit now and be really effective about and considering all of these limitations and questions around COVID-19. David, you spent a good deal of time at the TTC, and there was a time when we did it right.
Well, when you have a growing market, it's pretty easy to get it right. We had tremendous growth during the 80s when I worked at the TTC, and we were able to get our hands on resources. So we had buses in the fleet. We could improve service on routes. We could talk about longer range plans. But that all came to a drastic halt after 1988, when the recession hit. In the following 4 years, the city of Toronto lost 200,000 jobs, and that made it much less urgent to do anything, because when you take that many jobs out of the system, you reduce the demands. All of a sudden, the roads are less crowded. There's more reasons to drive. And we're seeing a repeat of this today, only much more drastically. I mean, we don't know yet what the implications of COVID-19 are going to be on the future employment in Toronto and the region. And therefore, we don't really know what we can do about it.
Yeah, and I guess there's the level of urgency, though, Ed, that has always been around this transit discussion, particularly in Toronto, because the focus has been so much on the relief line and the young line running well over capacity. We just can't handle the number of riders coming from the north end of the city into the core. Now, when we look at the way we have all learned to work from home, that is going to become part of the formula moving forward. To David's point, we get to a situation where we won't necessarily, or we may not have the number of bums in the seats we had 3 months ago. So with that level of urgency and then the long range view, you being the historian in all of this, how do you think we have to reshape or reimagine that transit service in Toronto?
Well, a number of possible answers and comments on that. As Dave mentioned, after 1988, at that collapse of the economy, there was a lot of purposeless scurrying around, and again, the plans were brought out by the TTC for 4 different little extensions into suburban areas. Politics took over again, but nothing about the real problems which were occurring at Bloor and Young and South. And, the urgency for a relief line was never stronger. That's when it really, really got serious. And I don't think there's any doubt that the tendency and the technical ability to work at home is going to have a pretty profound effect over the next couple of years and probably forever. There is great concern, it's not really been articulated yet, among the owners of office buildings in central Toronto about the future of their leaseholds. And places like Shopify have already decided they're going to abandon the office. My plaintive cry has always been and will always be that the human animal is the most social of social animals. And my own firm, which is now composed of about 100 people working happily at home in transportation planning and development planning and so on, keep complaining that they miss each other. And there's a certain thing about being in one place while you're doing your work, the nuances and the body language and the chance meetings in the hallways to discuss certain problems and so on, that I don't think online remote participation can ever really replace. But I do believe, unfortunately, that there is going to be a reduction in overall demand and peak demand. There's talk again about trying to make people spread out their trips. This is often not successful. There are so many factors in terms of the 24-hour day. You would think it would be ideal to get people working at different shifts, but it doesn't seem to happen. So I think that's the future. There's nothing certain but uncertainty. But I don't think we're going to see the overwhelming jam-ups that we've seen so far. And my fear is that is going to give the powers that be the chance to say, well, we can save $8 or $10 billion and defer once again, after 60 years of planning, that bloody relief line.
So let me ask you the question.
Mistake.
Let me just ask you the question then. I mean, given the circumstances that we're looking at now, I don't disagree with you. I can think that question is floating out there because there's going to be a public question as to whether or not they are going to use transit the way we used to use it out of fear of the pandemic. But there's also going to be the question as to whether or not we should be investing. Is that a good investment? Is underground subway the best investment that we can make in public transit? Or do we have to look at it more broadly and start to include things other than subways and LRT?
First of all, Toronto happens to be a lousy place to build underground transit because of its geology. It's nothing but watercourses and underground aquifers and so on. And we're getting into trouble already with the brand new whiz-bang Line 1 extension to Vaughan. The stations are beginning to look like they're 50 years old in some cases with the leakage. So there is nothing whatsoever wrong with transit, mass transit at grade or above grade. Most of the heritage systems like London and New York have at least half of their mileage above grade. People here don't seem to understand that. Oh, God, it's beginning to crumble away already because of that damned water infiltration. So it doesn't have to be a subway.
I think it's important to, at this point, particularly, to stand back and rethink exactly what the role of transit in the city, in the GTA and in large urban communities generally. And
exactly.
Having been studying this for a while, I come to the conclusion there's two basic functions that public transit plays. It supports the downtown, which couldn't exist without it. It was the only place in the region where you couldn't drive your car to because it was just too dense. And so we had to build transit, and other cities around North America and Europe, which didn't have as much transit, built transit to support the downtown. So the downtown, which accounts for less than 15% of the jobs in the region, attracts half of the peak travel demand, right? And the downtown couldn't work. I mean, this idea that we can, we're going to have to figure out a way to get buses carrying 25% of their current capacity so that we can be safe is not going to go very far. The other thing, of course, is there's a large segment of the population that relies on public transit because they don't have options. And these are people that work in industries. They tend to be immigrants. I mean, the people that choose to ride transit are traveling downtown. The other people in the system, which is by my figures more than 2/3, are passenger captives or transit captives. They're people that their choices are don't go or walk or bike. And of course, if you live downtown, these are reasonable options. In fact, 60% of the downtown residents work downtown, and that's been the case for the last 40 years. And a high proportion of those people walk to work or they bike. We thought back in the golden age of the TTC that we'd get more of them on public transit, but they'll use public transit, but less than 25% of the people living and working downtown are taking vehicles, are taking cars, and a small proportion are taking transit. The majority of the people are walking or biking, and so, but that's only about 10% of the total people who work downtown. And if the downtown's going to continue, we're going to have to get back to something that looks pretty similar to what we were seeing in 2019. Otherwise, the downtown is finished.
I mean, there are certain people whose names you know, but I won't mention necessarily, who think that the bicycle is the savior of mankind. And we've got to create bike lanes everywhere and emphasize that as a major transportation option. And Toronto is simply not built for it. Toronto doesn't have the climate for it, and the volumes that can be carried by it are just nowhere near what a well-designed mass transit or even a poorly designed mass transit system can carry. So I wish people would stop fantasizing about that.
But it's popular, and it gets votes.
It's very popular, and it's wonderful. I mean, it's great. In the summer's day, when it's not hot and humid, you'll see thousands of them out, and that's great. But it's not going to be usable as a surrogate for other types of transportation.
Well, we used to marvel at what we saw. I think you mentioned the other day about your earlier visits to China, where you saw this mass of people on bicycles.
It was amazing, but that was a very primitive country in those days. Nothing has been as phenomenal as the change in China in the last 30 years. Damn them. I mean, that's the way it is. It's an amazing thing to see.
So let me ask both of you then, because if we're focused on mass transit, what do we need to do to rethink this? Because I remember seeing some research out in Scarborough particularly, and they talked about the number of rides that began in Scarborough. Mm-hmm. The vast majority ended in Scarborough. Yeah. They weren't going downtown. So that we need this sort of these hives, I would think, of mass transit that are connected almost. Yeah. Whether it's buses or LRTs or streetcar or whatever it happens to be, the vehicle, we can argue about that. But that we needed a more efficient transit system in communities or beyond neighborhoods, but communities like Scarborough as opposed to having everything rush downtown. Okay.
Well, here's the challenge. I mean, the people that are traveling by transit who are not going downtown are people that have very few options. And what you find is that people with very few options soon find a way to buy a car. So we can definitely improve transit services to the suburban communities, and you can do it quite quickly if you were willing to invest in bus-based alternatives. Bus rapid transit is a perfectly logical approach to these things, but we boys love our trains, and you'll find that trains have appeal. I mean, building subways is very popular in the suburbs, and historically, in places like San Francisco, we found that, well, why do people support rapid transit investments? Well, they think that their neighbors will take the train and free up their roads. so they'll have an easier time of it. And this is one of the reasons why people like me have consistently overestimated transit demands and underestimated auto demands, because we haven't really appreciated the benefits of car ownership. And you add concerns about one's physical health and the need to keep 6 meters away from your fellow travelers, and that just makes the car an even more attractive option.
Toronto really does have one of the very best suburban bus networks of any major city, certainly in North America. I mean, if you look at a map of the TTC services, virtually every arterial road in Scarborough, North York, Etobicoke, and even in the parts of the old city of Toronto have high capacity, high volume bus services, all integrated, all in the same fare, all free transfer. So the bones of a improved bus system are already there. And that is not the case with places like Los Angeles and outer Chicago and all the rest of it that I've seen in the U.S.
So, okay, paint the picture for me then. If we're moving this thing forward, and it's going to be a long time before people have the comfort level or the confidence that we're going to be cheek to jowl again on a subway train or on a bus. And we are going to see a shift in the future of work. So, yes, people will get back to the towers, but even there, we're going to spread them out. So a lot more folks are going to be doing 2 days a week at home or whatever the case may be. Mix it up here, because for me, in terms of what should be the priority at Queen's Park City Hall to say this is the reimagination of our transit system in Toronto, integrating it with the regional express rails and all the GO plans that we've got with Mr. Verster touting outside of the 416, because it has to be a regional plan. So what's sort of at the pointy end of this spear, Ed?
Well, I think downtown Toronto is one of the few urban central areas that really has come a long way from what I remember as a child. I was born here 86 years ago, so I've seen it when it was a real overgrown hick town. The diversity of activities in the downtown is really quite remarkable. The cultural, the educational, the financial, well, all of it. And now it's becoming a major high-tech hub as well. And it would be a tragedy, because it's like a junior Manhattan in a way. It would be a tragedy to see that dissolve, and it would all become more like Los Angeles, which is a very curious metropolitan region in my view. Every time I've been there, I've marveled at how strange it really is. So that, if that is felt to be the thing that is worth preserving, we're still going to have to create a very closely integrated system to serve it. And the present subway system, as ambitious as it was for a small city at the time, is really does not have the capacity to do much more than it does already. It doesn't have the capacity to do what it was doing in 2019. But I think we've got to try and complete the network, and that without that relief line, the network is not complete, and it's going to be unbalanced and ridiculously concentrated at certain places that are ill-designed. And that might be the last subway or subway type service that we might see for the next 50 years, if not forever. Who knows? So I don't think we should abandon that, because there really is no other way of serving the kind of total mixed use, pulsating downtown that we're beginning to get. But the outer hubs needs to have much better non-subway type transit focused on certain major hubs, as Dave just described, Scarborough certainly being one of them, Mississauga another. To my mind, a place like Vaughan Metropolitan Center, excuse the expression, is a bit doubtful. That's the developers talking again. And frankly, developers are not good transit planners in general.
One thing I want to go back to, and what I call original sin. When we developed the Bloor Danforth subway, there were different visions of that line. And the planners, and particularly Hans Blumenfeld, argued that the city should focus on the downtown core, which is still the destination of the majority of people going to downtown. But the TTC had a logic, which was basically we take the highest frequency streetcar lines and put them underground. And we had built in the viaduct there, the Bloor Viaduct, the provision for trains to run. And there was a tremendous insistence that be done. Well, it didn't become very long after. By 67, 68, it became very clear that this was a serious problem, because the majority of people converging on Bloor and Yonge and the other side on St. George were in fact going to downtown. So they transferred there. So we took those two lines that came into Bloor and Yonge, we made that the focus of the world. But in terms of activity, the focus was really in the downtown core area, which had 2/3 of the jobs. So that's what created the problem. There was an attempt, which Ed documented wonderfully in his book, of how to operate. We had alternative trains being routed downtown by the university line, but that was a solution that did not work very well and created other problems. So from that point on, the TTC recognized that the Queen's Subway, not going just to Bloor, but extending north to Eglinton and Flemington Park and Thorncliffe Park, which were rapidly developing suburban communities that were highly oriented to downtown at the time, should have rapid transit. But when we got into the various recessions, the interest in that waned, and we lost our way, I think, in retrospect.
Well, don't forget the outer suburbs became cities, quote unquote, North York, Etobicoke, Scarborough, and so on. And their political ambitions, their population exceeded that of the old central city, and they imposed their will on the through their politicians on the planning of transit in the greater Toronto area, the metropolitan Toronto, which became the enlarged megacity of Toronto in 1998. And that's why the Toronto subway system has been built inside out and upside down. And the downtown has actually been neglected. And if it weren't for GO Transit, the core would not be what it is today or what it was. It's all politics. I mean, this is the thing that drives me and I think Dave too crazy. And now Richmond Hill, there's a bunch of politicians, as he knows only too well, he lives there, who want 40 and 45-story buildings in the middle of Richmond Hill. And we've got to have that extension of the Yonge Street subway up to Richmond Hill. I mean, nothing could be dumber.
I guess the question I would ask for both of you then, and as I listen to this, and I have followed the politics for years at City Hall and Queen's Park and the various city halls in the GTA. I'm not sure, as I listen to you guys, whether I should be optimistic or pessimistic about.
God, neither are we, honest to God. At least I am. I'm not.
I'm getting increasingly cynical, unfortunately, but it doesn't help. So we have to be as constructive and positive as we can be.
Yeah.
This is our home, and we want to see it continue to flourish. But
that's the key. That's the key.
It would be nice if we could get the politicians to focus on broad objectives and to get out of the business of developing transportation plans. There's, of course, the famous Not So Smart Track, which helped Mr. Tory get elected as mayor in the city. There's all sorts of things like this that where the primary objective is to get votes as opposed to get bums on seats.
Yeah, that's the way it is.
Our thanks to David Crowley and Ed Levy for being our guests today. You've been listening to Conversations About Construction, and we'd encourage you to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts and share it with your network. Conversations About Construction is produced for the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario by iContact Productions. I'm Dave Trafford.